Thomas Greaves had everything: a thriving career, a lavish lifestyle, and a beautiful new bride, but just 3 days into their Caribbean honeymoon cruise, he vanished without a trace. And Lillian Greaves, the woman who claimed to love him, had soon become the prime suspect in a chilling international murder case that shocked the world. On July 7, 2019, the Ocean Pearl, a towering luxury cruise liner, departed from Miami for a 10-day voyage through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. Thomas mostly kept to himself, while Lillian charmed the crew with her smiles and generous tips. The cabin door had been locked from the inside, but she couldn't find him. Around 1:47 a.m., Lillian exited the room wearing a robe and slippers and returned approximately 7 minutes later, holding a small bucket of ice. No one else entered or exited the cabin that night. Maritime investigators, along with FBI agents flown in from the U.S., began conducting interviews and collecting evidence. Lillian Greaves, still visibly distressed, repeated her story. She said Thomas hadn't been feeling well the night before and had gone to bed early. While the possibility of Thomas falling or being pushed overboard was considered, investigators were skeptical. While hallway and public area footage was available, there were no cameras pointing directly at private balconies. The change had been made quickly, without consulting his usual lawyer. Investigators also discovered that Thomas had booked the cruise entirely on his own credit card, and Lillian had no financial stake in the trip despite reportedly picking the destination. If Thomas had gone overboard from his suite, no camera would have captured it. Lillian maintained her innocence, offering up every detail she could recall, and even allowing investigators to search her personal belongings. But one detail raised suspicion. When agents looked into Thomas's financial history, they discovered he had recently changed his will. Accidental falls from cruise balconies are exceedingly rare, especially when the person is sober and healthy. More so, there was no evidence of a struggle, no blood, no broken items, and no scratches on the railing. The couple's suite appeared almost too perfect, as if untouched. She claimed she left the room around 1:45 a.m. to get ice from the nearby station and returned shortly after to find him sleeping. When she woke up, he was gone. She insisted she had no idea what could have happened and speculated that maybe he woke up disoriented and wandered off. The door had only registered those 2 movements on the electronic lock system. Nothing seemed out of place in the room. Thomas was known to be a cautious man. His friends and family described him as methodical, even paranoid, especially when it came to personal safety. The idea that he would sleepwalk or roam the deck at night without shoes or ID didn't align with the picture they painted. The electronic door log showed no activity beyond Lillian's brief trip out and back. It seemed impossible for Thomas to have left without the system recording it, unless he never walked out the front door. His passport, clothes, and belongings were all inside. His shoes were neatly placed near the bed. Only Thomas was gone. Crew members rushed to their suite and confirmed Thomas Greaves was missing. A full ship-wide search began immediately. When the ship reached the next port, officials boarded to investigate. Thomas Greaves had vanished at sea, with no explanation, no witnesses, and no sign of foul play yet. Something about the situation didn't add up. Every corner of the vessel was checked. The pools, the restaurants, the lounges, the engine deck, even staff-only zones. His name was called repeatedly over the intercom. No one had seen him since the previous evening. The cruise director announced an emergency meeting for all passengers and urged anyone with information to come forward. On the 3rd day, the ship docked in Nassau, Bahamas. Most passengers went ashore to explore, shop, and enjoy the beach. Lillian went too, briefly. But Thomas, according to a steward, said he was feeling tired and wanted to rest in the cabin. It wasn't unusual for someone to skip port days, so no one thought much of it. The ship left port that evening without incident. Among the thousands of excited passengers were Thomas Greaves and his new wife, Lillian. Thomas, a 43-year-old investment banker from Chicago, was known for his structured, meticulous lifestyle. He rarely took time off work, but after marrying Lillian in a whirlwind ceremony just 3 weeks earlier, he decided it was time to relax. They booked one of the ship's most expensive Suite upper deck private cabin with its own balcony, ocean views, and butler service. The couple had planned a quiet trip, mostly staying aboard, enjoying the luxuries of the ship, and spending time away from the world. It was supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime. For the first 2 days, everything seemed normal. Staff remembered seeing them at dinner and spot appointments. The next morning, just before breakfast service, Lillian approached the front desk with visible panic in her voice. She said Thomas was gone. Security footage was quickly pulled and analyzed. Video showed Thomas entering the couple's suite the night before, around 10:35 p.m. After that, he was never seen again. The captain was informed and followed protocol, notifying maritime authorities and the FBI. The investigation into Thomas Greaves' disappearance officially began the moment authorities boarded the Ocean Pearl at its next port. Investigators found the story difficult to reconcile with the facts. Attention turned to the balcony. The couple's private terrace overlooked the open ocean, bordered by a reinforced railing about chest-high. The ship's surveillance network was expansive, but not flawless, just 1 week before their wedding. Thomas had named Lillian the sole beneficiary of his multi-million-dollar estate, including his investment portfolio, 2 properties, and life insurance. The change had been made quickly, without consulting his usual lawyer. Investigators also discovered that Thomas had booked the cruise entirely on his own credit card, and Lillian had no financial stake in the trip despite reportedly picking the destination. Coast Guard teams began scanning the waters near the ship's last coordinates, but nothing surfaced. No body, no clothing, no life vest, nothing. On a quiet April morning in 2020, a retired couple hiking along a secluded beach in the Dominican Republic stumbled upon a black suitcase wedged between driftwood and coral. Weathered and sealed shut by salt and time, it had clearly been at sea for months. The couple contacted local authorities, who retrieved the case and brought it inland. She had gone by several last names in different states, and previous partners had described her as charming but unpredictable. David Miles, a retired contractor from Tampa, Florida, was reported missing by his daughter. Investigators now suspected that the murder of Thomas Greaves might not have been an isolated event, could be part of a broader scheme involving multiple victims. The pressure to locate Lillian intensified, but by the time officials arrived at her residence, she was gone. Her phone had been turned off, her car abandoned. Lillian Greaves had vanished without a trace. Again, the trail revealed that Lillian had transferred nearly $2 million into foreign banks over a span of several months. These funds came from life insurance policies, liquidated assets, and suspicious withdrawals from both Thomas's and David's accounts. She had carefully funneled the money through shell companies registered in tax havens, making it harder to trace. The scope of the operation indicated this was more than a crime of passion. It's a long-term con, carried out with chilling precision. He had been dating Lillian for several months. Just weeks before he disappeared, he had transferred the title of 2 properties to her name and added her to his bank account. The pattern was eerily familiar. There were whispers of sudden breakups, mysterious inheritances, and legal disputes over property and finances. None of it had raised serious red flags before. But now, in the context of a murder investigation, every detail gained significance. A red notice was issued through Interpol, alerting border control and law enforcement agencies worldwide. Her face appeared on news stations, online forums, and digital billboards at major transportation hubs. But Lillian had planned her escape meticulously. Her passport under her legal name was never used. Instead, she traveled under a forged identity, Alina Petrovas, lipping through airports and ferry stations with a quiet confidence that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd gone underground. What they found inside shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Surveillance footage captured her at a marina 2 towns over, where she rented a small boat under a false name. Hours later, that same boat was returned without David. Police located a nearby storage unit that Lillian had rented just a week earlier. Inside, they found blood-stained tarps and a pair of gloves. DNA tests confirmed the blood belonged to David Miles, though his body had yet to be found. The evidence was enough to issue a federal warrant for Lillian's arrest on suspicion of murder. Wrapped tightly in layers of black plastic and secured with multiple strips of duct tape were decomposed human remains. Lillian returned to the U.S. with the rest of the passengers once the ship docked in Miami. She was questioned again but not charged. Within days, the results confirmed the worst fears of the FBI. Thomas Greaves had been found. The medical examiner determined that the body had suffered blunt force trauma to the skull, indicating he had been killed before being placed in the suitcase. Based on the condition of the remains and the travel patterns of the ocean current, experts concluded that the suitcase had likely entered the sea somewhere along the route the ocean pearl had traveled. Suddenly, a missing person case became a confirmed homicide. With no concrete evidence of foul play and no body to confirm a death, the case stalled. Still, behind the scenes, agents grew increasingly convinced that Thomas Greaves hadn't simply disappeared. As the days passed, the search for Thomas expanded beyond the ship. Nearly 11 months after Thomas Greaves vanished, a strange discovery reignited the stalled investigation. DNA tests were conducted immediately. The recovery of Thomas's body changed everything. The narrative Lillian had offered no longer held. The likelihood of an accidental fall or self-harm was officially ruled out. Authorities now focused on proving that Lillian Greaves had orchestrated the murder of her husband. During what was supposed to be their romantic honeymoon, investigators pored over old security footage again. The timeline was re-examined in detail. The few minutes Lillian spent out of the room that night became crucial. It was the only confirmed moment she had been alone outside the suite, and potentially the time when the crime had been carried out. Authorities began re-examining her life more closely. Digging into Lillian's background revealed inconsistencies in her past. Then something unexpected happened. Authorities began to connect the dots. Lillian, it appeared, had moved on quickly after Thomas's death, once again targeting a man with substantial assets. With Lillian Greaves once again missing, federal authorities escalated the investigation to an international level. Investigators retraced her last known steps and discovered she had purchased a prepaid phone in Tampa, days before David Miles disappeared. Meanwhile, a team of forensic accountants tracked her digital footprint through a web of offshore accounts and crypto wallets. The trail revealed that Lillian had transferred nearly $2 million into foreign banks over a span of several months. These funds came from life insurance policies, liquidated assets, suspicious withdrawals from both Thomas's and David's accounts. He had seen the widely circulated photos of Lillian and believed he had spotted her boarding a ferry bound for Santorini. Greek authorities acted swiftly. They intercepted the vessel Madrut, boarding under the guise of a routine customs check. After searching the cabins, they found a woman traveling under the name Alina Petrova. The prosecution laid out a meticulous timeline, supported by evidence pulled from cruise surveillance, financial records, witness testimony, and forensic analysis. They argued that Lillian had carefully planned the murder of Thomas Greaves during their honeymoon cruise. She had drugged him using sedatives purchased online, then struck him on the head with a heavy object while he slept. Once dead, she stuffed his body into a suitcase lined with plastic, sealed it shut, and threw it overboard under the cover of darkness. Her brief trip to get ice was likely used as a cover or to dispose of bloodied materials. For those who followed the case, the murder at sea was more than a tragic honeymoon. It was the beginning of a chilling descent into one woman's ruthless pursuit of wealth at any cost. She bore a striking resemblance to Lillian, but claimed to be a Russian tourist. Her accent was convincing, and her documents appeared legitimate. Experts testified about ocean current patterns that supported the theory that the suitcase had entered the water near the ship, this location the night of the disappearance. Surveillance footage, though not showing the act itself, highlighted her calculated behavior and the fact that Thomas was never seen again after entering the room. She had carefully funneled the money through shell companies registered in tax havens, making it harder to trace. The judge called her crimes cold, calculated, and driven by greed. In a final statement, Lillian showed no emotion. She declined to speak, offering no apology or explanation. After her sentencing, investigators reopened several old cases involving sudden deaths and inheritances, hoping to find links to other possible victims. Large withdrawals and transfers from Thomas's accounts were traced directly to her within days of his death, and that the suitcase could have been tampered with by someone else. But the jury remained unmoved. After deliberating for just 9 hours, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The prosecution painted her as a manipulative predator who sought out wealthy, vulnerable men for financial gain, using charm and intimacy as tools for exploitation and murder. Calm and collected, she said nothing as she was led off the ferry in handcuffs. Surrounded by local and international police, the arrest sent shockwaves through media outlets worldwide. The woman once portrayed as a grieving widow had been exposed as a suspected serial killer and international fugitive. As she awaited extradition to the United States, investigators began building a case not just around Thomas and David, but around a string of unexplained deaths tied to her past, each with financial gain as the common thread. The scope of the operation indicated this was more than a crime of passion. It was a long-term con carried out with chilling precision. A break came when a tip was received from a retired police officer living in Greece. However, when officers compared her fingerprints to the international database, there was no doubt this was Lillian Greaves. She was arrested on the spot without incident.
Wow.
Lillian Greaves was extradited to the United States under heavy security. The moment her plane touched down, she was taken into federal custody and transferred to a high-security detention center in Florida. Prosecutors moved quickly, charging her with 2 counts of first-degree murder, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Though David Miles's body had never been found, the blood evidence and financial trail were enough to build a strong case. Public interest in the trial surged. What had begun as a mysterious disappearance at sea had evolved into one of the most sensational true crime cases in recent memory. The trial took place in Miami and lasted 6 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day. Jurors were shown the recovered suitcase and photos of Thomas's remains. The autopsy report was presented in detail. Then came the financial motives. Evidence showed that Lillian had encouraged Thomas to change his will and insurance beneficiaries shortly before their marriage. The defense struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence. They argued that there was no direct footage of the crime, no murder weapon. Lillian Greaves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though the Ocean Pearl still sails, and most passengers remember it for luxury and leisure, its legacy now carries a darker shadow. For those who followed the case, the murder at sea was more than a tragic honeymoon. It was the beginning of a chilling descent into one woman's ruthless pursuit of wealth at any cost.